Hello, everyone. This is Craig with Red Chip Companies. Thank you for joining today's event with Nexalin Technology, which trades on the NASDAQ under the ticker NXL. With us today, we have Mark White, President and CEO of Nexalin. We will begin with a brief presentation in a moment, and then we'll open this event to your questions. I will keep everyone's lines muted throughout the presentation. Users, however, may reach the panelists at any time by pushing the Q&A button at the bottom of their Zoom window and typing in their question. Before we begin, please allow me to read the Safe Harbor Statement. This call may contain forward-looking statements within the meaning of the Private Securities Litigation Reform Act of 1995. All statements pertaining to future financial and/or operating results, along with other statements about the future expectations, beliefs, goals, plans, or prospects expressed by management constitute forward-looking statements. Any statements that are not historical facts should also be considered forward-looking statements. Of course, forward-looking statements involve risks and uncertainties. I now turn the webinar over to Mark. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark White. I am the CEO of Nexalin Technology. Let me start with a little bit of good news. I have been doing 2 or 3 of these presentations a day on and off for several weeks. And the reason I say good news is I'm going to be able to, first of all, I've abbreviated the deck so that I can focus on the areas that are going to be of the most interest and actually demonstrate the investment opportunity as well as the future of this company. What I want to try to do is just sort of give you some background real quickly before I start. As you can see on the screen, you'll see the word neurostimulator. What neurostimulator means is we are in the business of stimulating neurons, in this case in the brain. The company, again, is called Nexalin Technology. We do this non-invasively, so there is no implants, there is no invasive procedures. This is a simple procedure to basically place a pad or an electrode on the forehead and then put one behind the ear on each side, left and right. And what we're able to do is treat all your primary mood disorders with what we call deep intracranial frequency stimulations. Everyone on this call has a brain that's currently functioning with a lot of electrical energy and a lot of different frequencies. And what Nexalin Technology has been able to accomplish over the last 15 years is we have studied the natural electrical energy of the brain. And when that energy is disruptive because of some type of a mental health disorder, whether it's children with attention deficit disorders, behavioral issues, parents with dementia, adults with addiction or anxiety, depression, insomnia, all of these are issues related to the health of the brain, and disruptive energy or electrical EEG, like EKG of the heart, EEG of the brain. So Nexalin Technology has created an FDA-controlled Class 2 and Class 3 device that stimulates neurons in the brain to correct issues associated with the primary mood disorders that you see on the screen. Everything that you're going to see today has been highly protected through a very strong and very robust intellectual property portfolio. 3 have been issued, 6 are still pending, with more filings to come. It's taken almost $40 million to date to create and validate this waveform. Waveform is how we stimulate the brain with these frequencies. And of course, everyone will see that this is a market that everybody knows somebody in the need of a mental health issue related to the primary mood disorders. All right, so on this slide, for instance, I highlighted the 4 areas, but the 2 boxes on the left and the right with a yellow box. Basically, this is a digital treatment. We're coming into a time period where currently the only treatment available for those struggling with any type of a mental health disorder, as everybody is aware, is tied to medications, pharmaceuticals, side effect profiles. We're coming into what we call the digital medicine age, the digital medical community, where we're actually able to use digital energy, digital frequencies to simulate the brain and the body's ability to correct itself. This is a digital technology that will be distributed on a digital virtual platform. So imagine that you will no longer have to go to a psychiatric office or to a psychiatric hospital to receive some type of a treatment, or some type of evaluation, it can all be handled through the privacy of your cell phone, your desktop computer at home, or other types of digital technologies. This is a global model that we're building. So this is not just an American problem. This is a global health epidemic. We're using a telepsychiatry, telehealth, telemedicine approach. And of course, this is, I mentioned, a large mental health epidemic going on at the global level. Everyone on this call knows somebody that needs help, whether it's children, whether it's adults, whether it's our friends, whether it's our family. The numbers that you see on the slide is basically demonstrating just some interesting facts that are taking place, whether it's related to insomnia, whether it's related to depression, which is the leading cause of disability in the United States in adults, whether it's economic impacts. We all, again, know someone that needs some type of help, and we all know that the only current model standard of care is tied to medications and or side effects associated with medications. The primary focus of Nexalin is the insomnia market, the anxiety market, the Alzheimer's, the addiction, and depression. These are, as I said earlier, are all issues tied to the health of the brain, our brain-based health disorders. This is where our focus is. Again, it's a global problem. Size of the market. So these are some of the indications that we are currently pursuing and developing strategies for. You can see that these are tens of billions of dollars in these current marketplace. And as I mentioned, the only standard of care is tied to medication and some of the challenges of medication. Currently, anyone that takes medication is going to experience some type of side effect. Less than 50% will respond favorably to medication. And of those that take medication, 75% would prefer a drug-free solution. Currently, the only drug-free solution historically has been talk therapy, and we know that talk therapy is less effective than medication. So again, the patient community is tied to side effects with medication. Less than 50% respond, which at Nexalin, we think that that number is basically just entirely too low. Basically, half of anyone that's currently seeking treatment will only have some type of positive effect related to the treatment. And then, as mentioned, everyone with that medication profile would prefer a drug-free alternative. Currently, the competition. So I frequently hear, oh, I think I've heard of this type of treatment. Well, there are different types of neurostimulators in the market, and obviously there's a lot of pharmaceutical drugs and pills in the market. This is not a handheld device that's a battery operated that you buy off the internet. This is not a magnetic stimulator that is installed in a psychiatric hospital or in a psychiatric setting as an alternative to ECT. And this is not pharmaceutical or drugs or pills. This is basically a slide that demonstrates there is no real current competition to the Nexalin stimulation that we have created. All of our work has been funded through trial partnerships related to the academics, UC San Diego, University of Pennsylvania. We're working with the Department of Defense. We're working with the Veterans Administration for PTSD, TBI. We're currently working overseas in the Asia markets. All of the clinical trials that have been published, there's been 8 published in the last 18 months, have all been tied to not only what we call a symptom response. So in other words, most of you will know that in clinical trials, controlled published clinical trials, you will study the patient response, meaning how do you feel on a scale of 1 to 10, and then you receive the treatment, and then on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel post-treatment? Our data is so strong that what we've decided to do at Nexalin is to also place what we call fMRIs, functional magnetic imaging, PET scans, EEG scans, biomarkers. We're actually studying the biomarkers of the brain, showing the injury of the brain or the dysfunction of the brain that creates or is the underlying cause of these mental health disorders. And then we're doing the pre and post assessment like traditional clinicals, and then we repeat that process. What I'm actually trying to say here is that we're raising the bar on the clinical evidence and challenging the markets to actually incorporate imaging of the brain pre and post treatment. So not only can we show a response by the patient we can actually demonstrate biomarkers that support the efficacy as well as the safety profile. Currently, so you'll remember earlier I talked about the 50% response of medication. Currently, our clinical trials are demonstrating between 75 and 92% of response in blinded controlled trials. All the patients are showing at least a 70% improvement. In other words, the separation between the active group and the sham group is demonstrated on the screen above. We're showing average improvements of 77 to as much as 84% in the primary mood disorders, 74% in depression in the average clinical trials. So we're almost double what the current response is to medication profiles. It is, as I said earlier, non-invasive, safe, undetectable to the human body, no discomfort. All clinical trials have been reported, no adverse events, no increase in risk. We spent quite a bit of time working with UCSD in Southern California, Camp Pendleton veterans, as well as Washington, D.C. This slide here is actually full of a lot of scientific information. For those that want to review it, feel free. Basically, the takeaway from this is, for the very first time, we're actually able to identify, again, the biomarkers associated with traumatic brain injury and PTSD in combat-related veterans. We've also been able to prove through those biomarker assessments and through the pre and post assessments of these veterans that have been non-responders to traditional treatment and have had some challenges with suicidation or suicide risk. We have now been able to show that we are able to dramatically improve the quality of life for these veterans, that we can conclusively show you biomarker data of the injury to the brain, pre and post, and the improvements in the biomarkers. This entire model has then been presented at 3 different military health symposiums. We then created a Nexalin advisory board that I'll touch on here in a few minutes, called Nexalin America, that is specifically focused on a relationship with the Department of Defense, the Veterans Affairs, Health and Human Services, to work with the United States government to take the technology to multi-site veterans administrative studies around the country in the areas mentioned, TBI, PTSD. Our most recent publication, so in the beginning, you've heard me talk several times about medication. Medication is here to stay. We're obviously not going to replace medication anytime soon. So we've made a strategic decision at Nexalin to start embracing our relationship with pharmaceuticals, because we're actually all in the same business, the business of improving the health and wellness of those struggling with various types of brain-based disorders. As you can see, in August of 2024, in a brain stimulation international peer-reviewed publication, we published a clinical trial where we were actually working with Lexapro. Lexapro, everyone will remember, was a very important and very strong antidepressant that was used for several years in the United States and is still very big overseas. All the patients in this study came to the clinical trial without any type of medication and were diagnosed with major depression disorder. It is a controlled trial. It was blinded and published. All the patients in the trial started taking Lexapro at 10 milligrams. The sham control group received a sham Nexalin treatment. The active group received active Nexalin treatment. So again, everyone came to the trial without any medication, diagnosed with depression, started taking Lexapro, and then half started doing sham treatment, half started doing active Nexalin. The active group at 2 weeks had 50% response from the members of the clinical trial versus 18% of the sham. So you'll remember earlier we talked about how low the response is of traditional antidepressants in the patient community. Only 18% at the 2-week mark had responded, where 50% with the Nexalin had responded, again, all taking Nexalin. So we're actually able to increase the effectiveness of Lexapro dramatically inside of 2 weeks. At 4 weeks, we had improved to 67% with the Lexapro versus 30% of the sham. We've now created a strategy where we're now approaching the pharmaceuticals to embrace the idea of Nexalin being used as a brain-based health neurostimulator that can actually support a lower dose of an antidepressant or anti-anxiety. And by supporting a lower dose, you can support lower side effects. This is our most recent publication. This was the 8th over the last 18 months. I think another point that's good to make about this technology is this is not a hypothesis. We did go outside the United States to perform a lot of our clinical evidence, in addition to the evidence at the academics with UPenn and UC San Diego. But what's important is all of these clinical trials are showing between 70 and 90% efficacy without any risk profiles or any type of adverse events. So this is no longer a hypothesis. This is real, and we are now currently introducing what will be the future of our technology and the future of mental health treatment. On the left, you can see what we call the Halo. This is a Gen-3 device. This device is something that will be used in the privacy of the home. It will be coordinated and controlled through an app that works with the cloud. It will require FDA clearance. This is a medical device. It will need to be prescribed by a psychiatrist or a medical doctor. This will all be handled through what we call a virtual clinic. I'll give you a little bit more visual support on the virtual clinic in a moment. On the right is what we call the Gen-2. This would be an in-clinic device for those that have been hospitalized and are not responding to medication or have suicidal tendencies. We will be able to provide a clinical device. Same for psychiatrists that want the patient to still come to the office. So we have a virtual model with a virtual clinic, which will create the opportunity to receive your diagnosis in the privacy of your home or in your office, wherever, through your computer, your tablet, your desktop. Then we will prescribe and ship the device to your home. It will then hook to the app to the cloud, and the protocol that the doctor prescribed for you will be downloaded into the device. You'll be able to use the device at home, controlling it with the app. Each time you go to the doctor for your assessment, just like you would in a traditional mental health scenario, the doctor will be able to go into the portal, monitor the use, monitor your response, and prescribe the device for another extended period of time. On the right, it'll still continue to be used in a clinical setting, hospital settings as well. The future is going to really depend on the Halo clarity. We are in front of the FDA. We've had 3 meetings with the FDA, taking our safety data that I mentioned out of those 8 published clinical trials, all of our safety data, all of the published trials. They have decided that this would probably be a candidate for the de novo. What that means to all of you is this. This is not a Me Too product. This product has never been brought to market. The FDA has never seen a product like Nexalin that can make the claims, that can make the efficacy claims or the safety claims. So therefore, it will go to in front of the FDA. The strategy is for a de novo application. So we will create a new product category at the FDA, reminding everybody that this technology is heavily protected through intellectual protection, both in the United States and at the global footprint. It does use state-of-the-art computers. This headset that you see here has a supercomputer, is what I would call it, inside the headset that's actually monitoring impedance of the brain, providing treatment adjustments live, and then being monitored and controlled through the app. It's all distributed through a virtual clinic. This is how the virtual clinic works. Just imagine that if you came home and found yourself after a tough week in some sort of an anxiety disorder, panic attack, or depression, or what have you, you would be able to pick up your phone, go into our virtual clinic, receive a diagnosis. The device is then shipped to the house, as I mentioned earlier, and the device is activated with the app, with your portal, with your patient profile number. The protocol is downloaded from the cloud. What we're doing is triangulating the relationship between the manufacturer and the distributor, between the patients and the doctors. So this is our slide. This here is Congressman Don Davis on the right. I mentioned earlier that we were pursuing a relationship with the federal government. So this was based on the success in our TBI PTSD studies in Southern California. We then created what's called the Nexalin America Advisory Board. We brought in members of the DoD, the VA. These are all listed on our website in our press releases, the members of the advisory board. We also contracted with federal lobbyists. We've had close to 30 meetings on the Hill. Most of these meetings are now with sitting congressmen and sitting senators. The picture on the right is Congressman Don Davis, who's on the House Armed Services Committee. He was a combat veteran that had struggled with PTSD. This is a picture of him placing the Halo headset. In addition to that, as I mentioned, we are currently working with the DoD on various study designs for military veterans struggling with combat-related issues, as well as combat performance. And from there, we go into our global strategy. So in addition to our American strategy with the FDA, our Generation 1 technology was approved originally through the FDA for anxiety, depression, and insomnia. This was the Gen 1. We've made 2 improvements to our waveform and our stimulation. That's what's currently in front of the FDA today. And we are also using a global strategy. We have created a joint venture in the Asia markets with China markets. We are cleared in the Asia markets for the treatment of depression and insomnia. We have a joint venture that handles the Asia markets, which we own 48% of. So we're able to actually sell to the joint venture. That is revenue stream 1. And then the joint venture sells and distributes into the Asia markets. And that would be, we split the revenue on that distribution, 48, 52%. I'm going to kind of come back to how we make money here in just a minute. As I mentioned a moment ago, there have been 8 clinical studies published in the last 18 months. Research was performed in leading psychiatric centers in Asia and was all funded through our partners. We generate revenue by selling to the JV, as I mentioned a moment ago. We just received clearance in Brazil and Oman. We're working in Europe and India. Again, we create revenue by selling the Gen 2 device, which is the clinical device, to the doctors, to the hospitals. So there is revenue to sell the device. There is a single-use disposable electrode that is a long-term revenue creation for the device. So each time it's used, you have to use a specific type of electrodes that can only be used with Nexalin technology. So it has a revenue stream long-term. The Halo device is sold to the consumer, the patient. And then once it is sold to the patient, it is authorized on a monthly subscription fee by the doctor through the virtual clinic. So the model is a selling model, which you sell the medical device either to the consumer, patient, or doctor with long-term recurring revenue streams. Our margins are running between 65 and 95%. Currently, we have approximately $5.2 million in the bank. We have no debt in the company. The current shares outstanding are 10 million, and you can see the remainder of the information. Management currently controls approximately 20%. What I've been doing over these last few presentations is grabbing sort of the key takeaways of Nexalin. So as I mentioned earlier, we received our first clearance for anxiety, depression, and insomnia in 2003 on the Gen 1 device. That's now been replaced by the Gen 2 clinical and the Gen 3 Halo headset. We have been through 3 pre-sub meetings with the FDA. We will begin patient recruitment and all the clinical trials for FDA within 90 days. We're working on the insomnia de novo application, which should be filed with the FDA within 12 to 14 months. You'll see that we have 5.2 in the bank with an average of about 240,000 monthly burn. So as you can see, we have a good cash surplus in the bank for the runway of our FDA filings and our clinical trials. The China and the Asia markets have taken our Gen 2 and Gen 3 into the prototype stage there. We expect revenues to begin within 6 to 18 months maximum out of the Asia markets. As I mentioned earlier, we have received current clearance for treatments of depression and insomnia. As I mentioned several times, 8 published trials with 70 to 90% efficacy with biomarkers. And most recently, our Lexapro published clinical trial with our new strategy to embrace the relationship with pharma rather than trying to strictly compete. That's what I have from the formal presentation here. I'm happy to answer any questions that any of you may have or go through any review of the previous presentation.
Thank you very much, Mark. If you want to speak to Mark White, use the raise hand button at the bottom of your Zoom window. I will then enable you to speak, and you can say you'll have to unmute yourself, and then you can ask your question. You can also type in your question using the Q&A button nearby, also at the bottom of your Zoom window. Mark, I know you've said that you're not going to wait for the United States FDA to approve anything that Nexalin produces. However, it's a question we get all the time. What's the expectation there, and how much can you reveal?
Okay, so we have a global strategy. So I'll slow down now and kind of go through it. I sometimes go quickly through the day. The global strategy is to approach smaller countries that are single payers that rely on, instead of their own internal medical boards or medical regulatory agencies, they rely on the FDA. And since the technology Gen-1 was approved by the FDA for anxiety, depression, insomnia, and then we've had other clearances in large Asian countries and now in the Middle East, the idea here is while we continue to go through the very slow moving process with the FDA, is to continue to go to South America. We recently cleared Brazil. We'll now start working on the other single payer countries and identifying distributors in those countries. As I mentioned earlier, we started with the Oman country in the Middle East. Obviously, we'll be moving towards other countries such as Saudi Arabia, such as Bahrain, and some of these other Middle East countries. I also mentioned that we have a strategy for India. We're currently doing clinical trial strategy development for the CE mark for Europe. All of this information, all of this that I'm sharing is really relying on the strength of the clinical trials that were published and the strength of the biomarker data, and then leaning on the FDA clearance for our Gen-1 and then the Asian clearance on our Gen-2 and Gen-3.
What capacity does the company have for manufacturing? Run us through that ramp plan, please.
So great question. And the good news is so we had a very strong relationship with a small contract manufacturer in the Silicon Valley area in San Francisco. And about probably 45 days ago, after we started optimizing the Halo and the Gen-2 for manufacturing, we needed to start looking at what would be called the scale. How do we scale the company's growth and make sure that we can handle the manufacturing? So we just recently started negotiations with a very large, very advanced manufacturing facility, strangely enough, in Houston, Texas, or about 30 miles outside of Texas. So currently, Nexalin is a Texas-based company. We're relying heavily on the medical community here as support and recruitment of the executives we needed. And so this new relationship with the contract manufacturer here in the Houston, Texas area, as well as our strong relationship with our contract manufacturer in Northern California. And then we do have the ability to go overseas for specific types of parts. And the takeaway of those three resources is a scalable manufacturing level that is all at the highest ISO certified clearances, all of the regulatory clearances, all would be FDA registered facilities for manufacturing.
To mitigate cash burn, could we see more grants/direct funding from government/foreign country sources?
Yes, yes, and yes. So grants. So we actually started work. So we looked at grant writing about a year ago, 18 months ago. And what we decided is that based on the investment that would be required to start a grant writing staff and a team of grant writers, professional grant writers, that we were really going to target some of the larger NIH grants and some of those larger corporate grants. So we recently started interviewing and working with some professional corporations that specialize in medical technology grant preparations. We're also looking at relationships with the federal government and the DoD and the VA and some of their programs so that we would actually be working together by supporting some of the capital investment as well as programs within the federal government. I do not have my lobbyist team on this call. There are several vehicles at the federal government in America that would support both not only research, but development and sometimes some manufacturing programs. And then, of course, anything with the DoD and the VA has several different types of programs for different types of funding vehicle, some that require congressional support and some that do not. As far as going overseas, actually, you notice that I talked about the Asia products taking our Gen 2, Gen 3, and that they were in prototypes development. So in order to receive funding from foreign governments to support distribution and manufacturing within their countries, after the intellectual property was accepted by those countries, we're able to now get additional funding to support manufacturing and distribution in those countries. There are research relationships not only in Canada, but also in Europe. So again, it's a 2 or 3 tier approach. I guess really what's happened in the last 2 years is this technology, beginning actually in COVID, we realized that the future of this technology was going to be in the virtual clinic. We knew that the research showed that 6 out of 10 people that qualify for a mental health issue will never receive treatment because of the stigma and because of the side effect profiles associated with the current treatment model. So we're like, okay, if we've got a treatment that's low risk, that's non-invasive, that's comfortable and highly efficacious, how do we deal with the stigma? Well, we take it out of the psychiatric office and put it in the privacy of their own home. Well, how would we do that? Well, COVID promoted telehealth. So we took the telehealth model, we went back to our engineering team and said, take our technology out of the console that used to have to sit in a medical hospital or a medical clinic, and now incorporate it using modern nanoprocessors, microprocessors, basically build computers that would go into the headset, and that headset would then process the treatment and the feedback necessary to drive the virtual clinic. So that's kind of how all this really works. And what's happened over the last 2 years, we were working overseas to validate the waveform, the actual treatment, while we were transferring from a clinical device to a headset device to the virtual clinic. The future of mental health treatment for all of you out there is digital medicine. We know that the human body will respond to certain types of stimulation. If you've looked at other types of health and wellness companies that are really on the cutting edge of treatments, cancer, mental health, other types of issues, you'll see that everyone's learning how to speak to the body in its native language. This is where Nexalin is going to be a leader. We're actually going to disrupt and challenge the current standard of care, and we're going to work with the medication model, which you heard earlier. So that's kind of how all this comes together and why that global strategy is so important, because it's a global problem, but more importantly, the global market is hungry for these types of technologies from America. And if we protect it with a global intellectual property program that's very strategic and very robust, then we're able to start strategically placing our technology in those countries.
Can you provide any color on the recent financing? The stock has dropped about 50% from that price. Is this a symptom of the market? And what can be done to attract targeted investors?
Okay, so we took the company public in September of 22. We had a raise last month. We've seen some volatility in the stock. It's been down back, I guess a year ago, it was way down. We went back up to somewhere over $3. Now we're back down right under $1. So there's a lot of very smart people in the markets that are trying to understand the volatility and how to predict it. I'm not going to tell all of you that this is 100% market volatility. I will tell you that that is the majority of the volatility is related to the tertiary market, the microcap market. Many of you are very familiar with what I'm describing. What I can tell you, the good news is this company is undervalued. there have been times because of market volatility, we were trading under our cash value, cash in the bank, and we were trading. So some of this is out of our control. What can we do? Exactly what I'm doing right now. I will spend 2 days next week in New York and New Jersey. I will spend then 4 days the week after that in Florida and the New York and the Hamptons, basically taking our headset. I don't have one here with me to show you, but we are now currently manufacturing these prototypes, and the final version of the product is literally in its final manufacturing, what we call the optimization stage. So what can we do for targeted investors? More webinars, get me on the road more. I've built a team that can manage the company in my absence so that I can be on the road. I've been working virtually for the last 4 years while I traveled promoting this company. That is essentially what we're doing, working with Redchip. We work with Crescendo Communications. So getting the word out. As I said several times, we know we have a problem. We know there's an epidemic. We know the solution's not working. We have a solution. It's proven. Not only do we have a proven solution that's safe, we have a proven distribution model that will provide a safe and effective treatment in your home. And that's the message that I'm taking. The company is well funded right now. We're very careful and very conservative. You saw earlier, we're running an average of $240,000 burn for the company, and all that we've accomplished over the last 24 months. That's almost unheard of at that number. So it's conservative fiscal policies, it's investor relations, it's webinars, it's getting the word out through every digital platform and putting me in front of as many people as possible. As all of you can tell, I know my technology, I know this industry, I believe in this technology, I have seen it work, I use it on a regular basis myself.
Is Halo sold only on a prescription basis in the markets in which it's been approved?
Yes, absolutely. It will only be sold under the supervision of a medical doctor. This is not a toy. If you go on the internet and you Google neurostimulators, you're going to see some interesting devices where doctors have said, oh, this is the greatest technology, this is that. And you can buy one off the internet by doing a little digital appointment with somebody. And the idea is that you can sit at home and watch TV and cure your major depressive disorder. That is not what this is. This is a very sophisticated piece of equipment. We are normalizing issues associated with brain health. We are in the process of challenging addiction treatment. Everyone knows someone struggling with some type of alcoholism or addiction. Everyone knows somebody struggling with various types of medications. At the end of the day, you can actually stimulate the brain's ability to correct itself, to normalize itself, and to stabilize itself. That's where we're going here. This technology is so far ahead of its time. And that's essentially what the real opportunity with Nexalin is the ability to disrupt the standard of care that's currently offered in the marketplace today.
Could we expect a start or ramp of revenues in the next 12 months?
That is our prediction. It could be as quickly as 6 to 8 months. It could be as long as 12 to 18 months. Now, what's driving that? Unfortunately, the economy is going through a little difficult time. And when the American economy affects other countries, so you're going to see some conservative policies in some of our partners at the global level. There are some opportunities that could come very soon, and these could be delayed. But the answer to the question is yes. You should see some revenues in that 6 to 18-month window, and there are multiple sources of that revenue. That is not just one source. We don't have all of our eggs in one basket, as you can see, which is why we are using that global strategy in these smaller single-payer countries.
Mark, could you go over again what happens in a target market, in a country, when you get that approval of the device? At that point, this person wants to know, who do you go after? What within the market, where are you focusing? Does that make sense?
Sure. So it's a great question, and there's a couple of different factors. Number one, the partners that we align ourselves with. Some choose to invest in the clinical model. For instance, Oman. Oman bought 3 devices right off the bat, and I think that they've been up and running now about 4 months. The last time I checked, they were averaging 5 to 6 treatments per day. So they were ordering several hundred electrodes at a time. You'll remember that the clinical device that is currently cleared in Oman, the Halo is still pending. The Oman clinical device relies on that console, which uses the disposable electrodes. So we're able to monitor usage. At the same time, there are distributors that we're looking at because Brazil is a different type of a model, a different type of a payer program from the government. So Brazil will be an actual distributor model. So distributors selling to the doctors for the clinical use of the device. Our focus is again on the Gen-2 clinical device, the same one that's been validated in all the publications and the clinical trials that I've mentioned. So it's a 2-tier approach depending on what the business environment is. It's either to a clinical model that supports the clinical model and then they market to patients, or it's to distributors that currently have client relationships in the medical community, and the doctors are in the business of buying the equipment and then selling to the end user patient. Again, it depends on the investor. All of our partners that are in these global countries are required to fund and pay for their own clearance in their respective countries. That's important because that shows the willingness to invest in the model in their country. So this just isn't, call up Nexalin and say, hey, I want to sell technology in Oman. It is, well, you have to begin by coordinating with your government in the Omanian government and the Ministry of Health, taking it all the way through, doing whatever clinical trial work is needed. This is why there's been so much success in the publications and the clinical data, is because everyone has to fund their own clinical trials to make the investment in a distribution model of the technology.
Mark, the questions do keep pouring in. This is good. What kinds of organizations within these countries buy Halo?
So the Halo will be actually in these independent countries. These will be managed and sold to the consumer. Now, each country has its own laws, like the United States, that are set up to protect the patients from doctors selling something that may not be efficacious, safe, etc. So depending on the laws and the business models, and then of course the payer models in those respective countries will drive the actual business model. But remember that the Halo is designed for the consumer to be used in the privacy of the consumer's home, and it is to be able to use a subscription model so it has a recovering revenue stream. Now, the military obviously will just buy the device and give it to their veterans, and it will be able to be used in a less restrictive manner, but that's because the medical team in the military will be in charge of supervising. So again, it depends on several factors that determine how the Halo will be distributed, paid for, and received from a regulatory standpoint, because it is digitally intensive depending on how intense the virtual clinic model is in the respective country that we would be selling in.
It is now the top of the hour. We're going to wrap up. For more information on Nexalin, listeners, reach us at 1-800-RED-CHIP. That's 1-800-733-2447, or email us at nxl@redchip.com. Please visit the information page created by RedChip for Nexalin. It's nxlinfo.com. There you can view and download the investor presentation and fact sheet and sign up for news alerts on Nexalin. Please be sure to watch Small Stocks, Big Money, RedChip's program featuring exciting small cap companies, including occasionally Nexalin itself, every Saturday night at 7 p.m. on Bloomberg USA. Join RedChip's forthcoming webinars: Genetic Technologies tomorrow, Thursday, August 15th, ASP Isotopes on Tuesday, August 20th, and Green Power Motor Company on Wednesday, August 21st. Register for those events and for all RedChip webinars at redchip.com/events, where you can also view an archived version of today's webinar. Thanks again to our many participants, and thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you. I hope everyone has a great day.